Welcome to Marathonology. Marathonology is a program about facing our destructive patterns and finding principles how to break them. We are focusing on the principles behind the 12 steps, and the 12 steps are primarily known from the AA environments, but they have proven to be efficient tools how to deal with life and how to handle different challenging situations. During the program, you will meet psychologist Vibeke Frederiksen, who will guide us into some of the major and general problems that we face as human beings, and also show us practical ways how to deal with those and finding exercises how to handle some of those situations of life. I am going to give you an introduction into the step and also show you some of the biblical principles behind it. The step that we are focusing on today is step number 3, and it sounds like this. We made a decision to turn our lives and our wills over to the care of God.
In the third step, our focus is to turn our lives and our trust to the care of God. As the steps are built up, the first 3 steps goes together. And that means in the first step, we recognize our own powerlessness. In the second step, we turn to God to find our help somewhere else. And in the third step, we are prepared to turn over our life to God. The purpose of the first 3 steps is for us to look at our own lives, be prepared to see ourselves, and to establish the contact with God. In the third step, we often have a strong desire to quit this program altogether. And many of us experience it in this way that suddenly all other things seems very, very important to take care of right now instead of going into the process. I want to give you an encouragement to hold on to this program. I want to remind you that there was a reason that you had this interest in this program, and there was a problem in your mind you wanted to have solved. You can decide to finish the program now, and if you do that, the only thing that is won is that you have become more aware of the destructive pattern you're struggling with, and you have become more aware of how it influences your life and your relationships to other people. In the third step, it is all right for us to come to God hesitantly. He knows that it might be difficult for us to give ourselves over to Him as a higher power. We have a nice slogan in the 12-step program that is called one step at a time, one day at a time. And what we can do is we can give ourselves over to God today. Tomorrow we can do the same thing, and the day after tomorrow we can do it again. And that might be necessary for us because it's difficult to overview our own lives. We don't know what will happen tomorrow, and that might make it very, very difficult for us to give ourselves over to God on a lifetime. So we do it one day at a time. Very often we experience that the pictures of God we carry with us might influence our ability and our willingness to give ourselves over to Him. Some of us are raised or influenced by views of God as Him being an angry, unpleasant person, unmerciful, or maybe just God as an old man who doesn't really know what modern life is all about. And those pictures will prevent us from giving ourselves over to God. So it might be necessary for us to kind of start all over again and experience who God really is, to receive His love and be able to give ourselves over to His care. If we stay a little while in the picture Lars painted for us with God as our captain, it is certain that He wants to go on board, stay on board with us and be with us. And He will do that, and He will help us even if our ship is a full mess in every way. And it is obvious for everyone around us that our life is a mess. He's also willing to be with those of us who might have a nice ship. It looks very good, But behind the walls, with a nice vanish, we know ourselves that things are not the way they're supposed to be. Even if your life look the one or the other way, He will be with us as a caring captain who can help us through every situation in our lives.
The third step in the process that we find ourselves in is going like this. We made a decision to turn our lives and our wills over to the care of God. This is a strong statement. For some of us, it might be an easy statement because we have made it many times in our lives. For others, this is a very powerful statement, and to a degree maybe a frightening statement, because it really talks about letting go of control and letting God take over the control of my life. It's to actively use my own will to choose the will of God, for that will to set the course, set the direction for my life. So in that sense, it's a very strong statement. It's a very powerful decision. For some of us, this can also be a complicated thing to deal with, because we have tried in different kinds of situations to give ourselves over to other people in our lives. There have been caretakers in our lives, in our childhood, but also maybe grown-ups in our adult life, where we have had relationships where we have given ourselves over to other people, to the care and to the love of other people, and to meaningful relationships. And maybe for some of us, these relationships have been disappointments in our lives, because they didn't turn out the way that we hoped for, or maybe because the persons that were meant to take care of our lives, to look after us and to be the adults of our lives, that they did not live up to their responsibility. So to some degree, all of us, we have experienced to be let down, and for some of us it's in a very strong way. And when we have such experiences with us, this can be quite complicated and quite difficult to deal with. Because I'm in a situation where I experience that if I give myself over to this person or to this relationship, I might experience getting hurt again. I might experience the kind of pain that I've experienced earlier on, and I don't want to go there again. And if that's the case, we have a strong fear actually in our lives to give ourselves over to anybody. So we develop lives where we remain in control and where we only allow relationships to go to a certain degree in our life. And the consequence of that is that we find ourselves quite lonely actually. It's not a loneliness that we want, that we prefer, but we are there because we cannot face the chance of getting disappointed, of getting hurt again. So if that's the case for you, this is it's a complicated situation. And you might satisfy it yourself or your surroundings by saying sentences like that. But if you go deep down to the bottom of your heart, you might find it very difficult to do it with all of your heart, to say, God, I give myself over to you. Some of us might find the price of giving ourselves over to God to be too high. We see an example of this in the Bible, of a rich young man who came to Jesus. He liked what Jesus said, he liked the teachings of Jesus, and he liked what he saw Jesus doing to other people. And he said, Jesus, I want to follow you. And Jesus says, okay, well, sell everything that you own, give it to the poor, and come and follow me. And the story says that the young man, he went away and he was sad about this situation because the price was simply too high for him. He was a rich young man and he couldn't see himself just giving everything up of his wealth and choosing to follow Jesus in this way. And for us, this story may have some relevance because it might be a good idea for us to just think about what is it that I have to give up in my life, to give over the control to Jesus. And for some of us, it's very evident. For some of us, it might not be that evident. But it's an important question for us. And for some of us, we would actually have to admit, like the young man, I'm at a stage in my life where I just couldn't just give up everything that I need to give up to give myself over to Jesus. The price is simply too high. So if that's the case of my life, what do I do then? Do I just give up? Do I skip this process? Do I just say that, well, for me it's impossible? No. I might go back to the first phase again, to the first step of this process and look at my helplessness again to find the motivation, to find the way to give myself totally over to Jesus. Some of us may realize that we are not ready for the full surrender, but we might be ready for the reluctant surrender. An example of this we find in the story of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was a man who had kind of failed his life in many ways, you could say. He was working for the Roman Empire, he was stealing and he was cheating from all kinds of people, and he ended up being very alone in his life. But when he heard Jesus was coming to town, he kind of had a hope that Jesus might be able to help him break his destructive pattern. But he was not ready just to run along and throw himself at the feet of Jesus, but he was ready to find a tree, to climb up that tree and look at it all from a distance. And that was enough for Jesus. That's kind of the interesting thing in this story, because Jesus goes directly to this tree, he looks up and he calls Zacchaeus, come down, today I want to be a guest in your house. And in this sentence we learn three things that might encourage us in our process of surrendering to God. First of all, he calls him by name, which means that he shows him that, Zacchaeus, even though we meet for the first time and it's the first time you see me, I have seen you all the time. I know you, I know your life, I know everything about you. I know you even better than you know yourself. I call you by name. And number two, he says, come down. And in kind of going into this story, we might take it too far, but in the whole biblical perspective, I think it's right to say that Jesus in a way says to him, you don't have to climb any higher to get up to my level. I want to meet you in the middle of life, in the middle of the street, in the middle of the road, right where we are. You don't have to climb up. I meet you right where you are in life. And this, for us, this means that we don't have to do anything specific or special to be ready to meet Jesus. He meets us right where we are in life. And then the third, he says, today I want to be a guest in your house. And for Jesus, that's a strong statement, because it means that he chooses Zacchaeus and he says, I want to visit your house. I want to be with you today. For him and for the people listening to this was a strong statement. And it also tells Zacchaeus that he didn't have to go home first and prepare and change things for his home to be ready for Jesus. But Jesus was ready to visit him, to go into his daily day life, his daily day routine, just as it was at this time. And for us, this also has a strong meaning, because it means for us that we do not have to change a lot of things right here, right now. Things will change when we meet Jesus. That happened in the case of Zacchaeus, and that will happen in the case of us. But to meet him, to invite him, to give ourselves over, we can do that right here, right now, right where we are in life, even though we are struggling with this specific destructive pattern that we are struggling with. Now, when it comes to surrendering, I was once pondering about this, and I think I was preparing for a teaching, and I chose to make an experiment. So I asked my two kids, my daughter and my son, to kind of let themselves fall back, and told them that I would catch them. And my daughter, she's the oldest, and she kind of looked over the shoulder and she said, well, Dad, you should stand a little closer to me. And she gave me a lot of instructions, and it took a lot of time before she was able to fall back. With the younger boy, he just said, well, okay, and he just let himself fall back immediately into my arms. And to me, that became a kind of a picture of how it is in my life, that I stand in this situation and I actually have the invitation from God who says, well, just fall back, I will catch you. That's the whole invitation of this step that we are dealing with now. And well, I can say, well, God, if you should do that, you should do it in this way, in that way, you should stand closer, and I give all my instructions. Or I could do what I probably should do, like my youngest son. I should just let myself fall back. And that's maybe what we should choose where we are right now in this situation. For some of us, being in control is so ingrained that we find it almost impossible to do that. Just let ourselves fall back. If that's the case for you, there is an encouraging story in the Bible that we can just reflect a little bit upon now. It's a story of the disciples being at the sea, and they are in the storm and they are actually fearing for their lives. And Jesus comes to them walking on the water. And when Peter sees Jesus, he says, Jesus, if that's you, please tell me to come to you on the water. And Jesus says to Peter, well, Peter, come. And the story tells us that Peter, he left the boat and he was actually walking on the water. And most of us would say, well, this is an impossible situation. And actually in the Egyptian sign language, one of the ancient Egyptian sign languages, the word for impossible was described as a feet standing upon the water. So this is literally a situation of the impossible that we're dealing with here. And for us who experience, well, giving myself over, that is an impossible thing. Taking all my experience into consideration, I will never get to that place. Maybe that's the story that we should think about today and say, well, God, I want to be honest with you. God, I cannot give myself over. But I pray that you will do the impossible in my life so that it will be possible for me, in spite of all my experiences, in spite of all disappointments in my life, to give myself over to you.
We have now heard Lars introduce us to the third step, and I will now give you some instruction about how you can work with this step yourself, with your group or with your partner. The third step is the first time where we have to actually do something, to act. Up until now, it has been enough for us to reflect over our life and to talk about how we feel things, how we experience them. Now it's time to act and to give over our life to a higher power, to God's hands. Sometimes when we come to the third step, many of us experience that we never really got to this powerlessness. We are still struggling, trying to solve our own destructive patterns, even though we know it doesn't work. If that is the situation for you, I will encourage you to start all over again and do the first 2 steps before you go into the third step. When you are ready to do the third step, I will encourage you to share with your group or with your partner the experiences you had in life that convinced you that you needed help. The situations where you thought, this doesn't work, I need someone else to take care of this, I need some help from the outside. I also want you to share again the hope you have for your life. Share the thoughts you have and the dreams you have about a life without your destructive pattern. It will also be of great help for you to share the areas in your life where you can experience you have unwillingness to give yourself over to God. And I want you to reflect on and think about the reason why those areas are so important to you and so difficult for you to let go of. Maybe when you listen to this exercise of falling back that Lars told us about, you could kind of relate to that and to the fear of falling back. And if that is the situation, I would like you to reflect on that feeling and think about what it is in your life you want to stay in control of. What circumstances is it you want to have control of before you're willing to fall back and give your will and your life over to God's care.
I hope this program was beneficial for you in your situation. If you want to explore this further, I will recommend this book, Marathonology. In the book, you will find stories from people who have been working with the steps. You will find the principles behind the steps and exercises that you can work with in your life and in your situation. And if you want to, you're also very welcome to check out our website.